Welcome IT202 to Module 2. In Module 2, you will learn about virtualization and network configuration in relation to operating systems, OSs. Virtualization has changed how traditional computing is managed in business environments. Computing is expensive for companies. It is also inefficient in many ways. This inefficiency requires administrators to handle software updates and patching processes. Organizations must also maintain hardware support and staff the help desk. Virtual desktops run on centralized servers in a data center. These servers are far more powerful and reliable than traditional personal computers or PCs. The applications that users need are also hosted on these centralized servers. Virtual desktops are accessed through workstations, thin or zero clients, or other devices. These devices are more reliable and less expensive than maintaining PCs. Hardware failures do not impact virtual desktops because the data is maintained on the centralized server. The data does not leave the data center, so the risk of a lost or stolen device is reduced significantly. In addition to virtualization, you will learn how an OS is configured within a network. An OS configuration can use a wired or wireless connection. No matter their size, all organizations must connect their OSs and machines to a network. Machines that are not connected to a network cannot communicate with other network devices, such as printers. As you complete this module, consider the following questions. How do you know if a desktop OS runs on a local hardware or a remote server? How is an OS configured within a network? So, in that overview, it talked about what's called a VDI, a virtual desktop interface. It is where the machine that you're using is not the brains of your OS. It's not really running your OS. It's just working as what's called a dumb terminal. It's being your display, the TV screen, the monitor, and your keyboard and mouse. It's providing keyboard input and mouse input, but it's sending everything, all of your keystrokes, all of your mouse input to through the network to a virtual machine that's running on a server somewhere to actually do the computing. Now, the benefit for this is you can have machines that are very, very powerful and that are, how do I want to put it, that are well maintained, that are standardized, that are clean, efficient machines for you to use. That when you get in and you're working on it, you know it's going to work. Especially if you're working in a large company. Think of a big call center where you don't always necessarily get to work at the same desk every day. You always could get the same virtual desktop, the same virtual machine to be working on. Joe would always log into Joe's virtual machine, for example, and always have Joe's documents and all of Joe's bookmarks would be set up and all of those things. So that's one of the benefits. Now, the downside is it's not a laptop that you can just take with you and you always have your machine no matter where you are. You have to be connected to the network, and the network has to connect to the server to run that virtual machine. So it's not like you could be with a laptop and be not connected to a network and still be able to run all your applications. You still have to be connected to the server to be able to connect to that virtual desktop environment to be able to connect to your virtual machine to do it. So there is some of those downsides to it. But it does mean that no matter how basic the machine that you're using to go through, you'll always be able to upgrade and use a better system, a newer operating system with it, because the server image can always be updated and work with the latest and greatest hardware on the server, because the server can emulate that latest and greatest hardware, even though the physical dumb terminal machine that you're working with may not be able to handle that. Okay? So that's what that's talking about there. And when it's talking about connecting to the servers or not connecting to a network, the only time you are not connected to a network and you would want something like that is if you're talking about like an air gapped system, something where you don't want to connect to it. And if you think back to the original Mission Impossible, where he was hanging from and I'm drawing blank on the um Tom Cruise. There we go. Tom Cruise was hanging and coming down from the ceiling in the, I think it was CIA headquarters, and he had to get to this air gapped computer that's never connected to the network to be able to get the knock list. Um, that's what an air gapped computer not connected to the network can't get to a printer, can't get to another computer, can't do anything else. It is only good by itself. That's not what 99.9% of the world's computers are. Most computers are networked. So, looking at the module at a glance, you're going to have the required resources for Module 2 we'll go over in a minute. You're going to complete the short paper on virtualization. You're going to have a couple quizzes, and then you're going to have the milestone that you're going to complete this week. So let's get right to it. When we're looking at the first of your resources is about virtualization. The resource in this module will inform you of the concept pertaining to the cloud and virtualization, specifically in relationship to OSs. In the past, physical computers could only have one operating system on them. Today, virtualization allows for multiple OSs to be used on one physical computer. Instead of directly installing one OS on a physical computer, multiple OSs can be installed using a hypervisor and virtual machines. Excuse me. By using virtualization, organizations can better utilize their hardware capabilities to ensure that resources are not wasted. By exploring the resources in this section, you will also learn about virtual memory and application management. Now, when PCs first came out, yes, you installed one operating system and that's it. And it would boot up to that operating system and that's what you worked with. And then came along the option of dual booting, where you could choose to boot up to one of two different operating systems. And if you were good with computers, you could choose to have it prompt you on the boot process when it's loading up. Hey, do you want to boot into Windows or do you want to boot into, for example, Linux? And you could have it choose which of those two things you wanted to boot up to. You could even have a Mac choose to boot up into Windows or boot into the Mac OS. And those were your choices, or Mac or Linux. And those are the options that you would have to choose from. But it was only one at a time. You were doing either booting into one option or you were booting into the other. And then came the idea of hypervisors. And it used to be that you were doing things like ESXi host, and you could do things for businesses, for commercial, where you would have a big box, a beefy box, and you could do virtual machines within that one beefy box. So instead of one server running as one computer, basically one server chassis and bit of RAM and CPU and hardware running as one unit, being a web server or a middleware server or a database server, you could choose to say, hey, I don't need all of those resources for my one server. I could break that up and use some of the resources for a web server and some of those resources for a database server, for example. And I could break that up into two servers. And I would do that with virtualization. And I would treat that as two separate computers. Then they were able to do that with software emulation. And you would use things like VMware VirtualBox, or VMware, excuse me, or Oracle VirtualBox, VMware Workstation, or Oracle VirtualBox, the two products. And that's when you could start, or Virtual PC was also another option that was out there. And that's when you could actually run things within your own computer. Like I have, where I can run within my Windows computer here, I can run Linux within it while Windows is still running. I have enough memory and RAM and CPU that I could actually run a version of Linux right while my main version of Windows is still running. I could be interacting with it without having to choose one booting up or the other booting up. Okay? So looking at when we're talking about required resources about virtualization, Uh, cloud computing is becoming more and more common due to its cost benefit. Through cloud computing and virtualization, someone with a personal computer can use different OSs as well as the main one installed on the physical machine. As you explore these sections, you will learn about foundational cloud computing concepts, virtualization, virtual machines, and hypervisors. So you go through section 6.3, cloud computing, 6.4, virtualization, and as you explore, consider the following. How does the use of virtualization allow users to have access to multiple OSs on their desktops? Why might an organization choose to use virtualization in its decision to implement OSs? And how does virtualization work? And then we're going to move down to chapter 7, and virtualization is often referred to as the cloud. Through the cloud, multiple operating systems can function on one machine. One operating system might be on the physical machine, while another OS is accessible through a virtual desktop infrastructure, VDI. IT professionals have to consider whether an operating system should be run on a computer's physical machine or virtual machine. As you explore these sections in CompTIA, you will learn about virtual memory, paging flags, and configuring desktop applications both on Linux and Windows. So then you go through section 7.4 on Windows Application Management, 7.5 on Linux Application Management, and 7.7 Virtual Memory. And as you explore, consider the following. Can users receive great performance from anywhere? How might virtualization promote and support bring your own devices into the environment? And then can physical desktop storage be replaced with virtual storage? And then there are two other readings, optional readings about modern computer architecture and organization. And then what is virtual desktop infrastructure? VDI explained. Okay. The next resource is about network connections. Excuse me. Each computer connected to a network must follow a set of rules and specifications that define the characteristics of both the physical connection and the form and structure of the data that moves from one computer to another. Without these rules, network users cannot be sure that their computers will communicate successfully. Network connections are customized and configured within the operating system as it relates to the current environment. As you explore the resources in this section, you will enhance your understanding of the networking specifically in relation to OSs. Okay? And you're going to work with chapters 11 and chapter 3 in this section. Networks are allowed different companies and devices to connect to each other. One way to connect a system to a network is through a wired connection. Chapter 11 of CompTIA describes foundational concepts of a networking, including how to connect to a wired network, media and infrastructures. A networking operating system provides features such as file sharing across the network and includes a communication scheme that allows different processes on different computers to exchange messages. A computer running a network OS acts autonomously, excuse me, I can get it right, from all other computers on the network. Although it's aware of the network, it is able to communicate with other network computers. A distributed operating system provides a less autonomous environment. The different OSs communicate closely enough to provide the illusion that a single OS controls the network. Now, when it's talking about those ways of talking, so a network has protocols and connections. So not only is it wired, so it has a way of communicating. So think of you've made that telephone line. So you've made a mechanism for how they can talk, but they've used a protocol. So basically, they let you know that they're going to speak English to each other. Okay? And they've decided that they're going to speak in 5-word bursts to each other. Each can speak up to 5 words and then stop, and they'll listen for the other to speak up to 5 words, and then they can speak 5 words again, and then the other can speak 5 words again, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that's how their communication grows. But if they didn't have that protocol in place, if one person was going to be on the phone and start speaking English and the other one starts speaking German, for example, they wouldn't be able to talk to each other. Or if the one person starts speaking English and speaks for 50 words and never stops, and the other person can only handle 5 words at a time, that would be what we'd call a buffer overflow. And it would be sending too much information for that second person to handle, it couldn't handle when it got over those 5 words. It wouldn't know what to do with all of those extra words, and it wouldn't handle it well. So those are the kind of things that those communications and protocols handle. Okay, so you're going to look at chapters 11.1, networking overview, chapter 11.4, services provided by network devices, 11.7, networking hardware, and then 3.1, networking media. As you explore, considering the following: how does a network provide scalability for an enterprise organization? What are advantages and disadvantages of a client-server network and a peer-to-peer network? What are network media and what are their differences? And then also in Chapter 11, as you explore these sections of CompTIA, you will learn about that wireless networking enables difficulties associated with laying wire, drilling into walls, and stringing Ethernet cables throughout an office building or home. Laptop users have the freedom to roam anywhere in the office building or home without having to use a connector cable or available jack. Every room in a wireless home or office can be connected to the network, so adding more users and growing a network can be as simple as installing a new wireless network adapter. Okay, so you're looking at 11.5, wireless networking, 11.6, SOHO configuration, 11.4, services provided by network devices. Okay. As you explore, considering the following: how important are wireless standards as they relate to operating systems? What are common authentication and security methods configured for a wireless network? And what are importance of the default security settings and configurations within a wireless network? When should they be customized? And then we moved on to the short paper about virtualization. And if we look at the guidelines and rubrics, we get here: understanding virtualization is key to the role and expertise of an IT professional. Virtualization can benefit an organization's IT infrastructure and business operations. There are many benefits to virtualization. Cost savings and minimizing downtime are among a long list of benefits. This written assignment aims to familiarize you with the concept of virtualization. You will also discuss the types of virtualization, their benefits, and their uses in modern computing. Review the required resources for this module and gather more information from credible resources if needed. Write a paper defining virtualization and describe the benefits and uses in modern computing. Specifically, you must address the following rubric criteria. Define virtualization. Define virtualization and explain its significance in computing, and briefly explain the history and evolution of virtualization technology. Benefits of virtualization. Briefly explain the key benefits of virtualization, and provide examples of how corporations, hospitals, and schools have benefited from virtualization. Challenges and considerations of virtualization. Discuss the considerations and challenges associated with virtualization, and discuss security challenges associated with virtualization. And then the future trends in virtualization. Describe future trends in virtualization technology and discuss how emerging trends and advancements in virtualization technology will impact corporations, hospitals, and schools or other sectors. So what do you need to submit? Your submission should be at least 2 to 3 pages of Microsoft Word documents with double spacing, 12-point Times New Roman font, and a 1-inch margin with APA style citations. Okay? So it needs to be at least 2 pages. Now, Chances are it's going to be more than that, but at least 2 pages to go through all of that. And then if you look at the rubric, it'll tell you how it would get the points based on these different criteria, what we're looking for. Okay? So that's the Module 2 short paper. There are 2 quizzes. You're going to do 11.1.4. And remember, on the quizzes, you can take them as many times as you like. And the highest grade is what is recorded. So the highest grade by Sunday night at midnight, Eastern Standard Time, is what gets graded. Okay? So 11.1.4 and 6.4.8 is what will be for this week. And then the Project 1 milestone, the site survey, and we bring that up here. Scroll back up to the top. For the purpose of this assignment, imagine you are a system architect at a medium-sized publishing company with 130 employees. The company primarily publishes books, both in print and online. It also produces other kinds of content, such as audiobooks, interactive reading material, and magazines. Your leadership has decided that it is time to either upgrade the current OS or adopt a new one. Examples, Windows, Linux, or Mac. As a system architect, you have the responsibility to determine which OS the company should implement for each department. So it doesn't have to be the same. You have to decide for each department which one they should use. There are many aspects to consider when making this decision, including what existing applications are used by employees on a frequent basis, cost, functionality provided, performance, vendor support, and so on. To determine what OS should be implemented, you need to complete a site survey first. Later, the site survey can be used to help you make a decision as to which operating systems to implement based on what is currently used in the department. For this activity, you will conduct a site survey. This is also a step that you will need to take when you submit Project 1 in Module 4. The feedback that you receive after submitting this activity should be implemented as you craft your Project 1 submission. So in other words, what you get back from me based on this submission, you will alter and make adjustments to when you do that final Project 1 submission. Okay, so if there's anything that's finds lacking in this, you will fix it and make it right for when you do the module or your Project 1 submission to Module 4. Okay. So the prompt, complete a site survey. A site survey compares the 3 different operating systems that the company is planning to implement. To complete this task, use the Project 1 site survey template linked in the supporting materials area. Specifically, you must address the following rubric criteria. Operating systems. Acknowledge what OSs are already used in your site survey, the type of OSs already used, and how many employees are using it can influence your decision making. Server. Determine whether the desktops are on a hardware or cloud-based server. Although not required in this portion of the project, you may want to think about whether or not the server should be changed. This could be recommended in your proposal. Standard hardware for operating system types. Determine the minimum required hardware. This could include desktop and server. Network connection. Determine whether the network is wired or wireless. You will want to think about whether or not the network connection should be changed. This change could be recommended in your proposal. And then applications. Identify what software applications need to be supported by the OSs. Your survey of what applications desktop users use most frequently will influence your decision making, as some applications are not supported by certain OSs. So that's a key point. If you all of a sudden say that you're going to switch to Linux for a certain set of users, but the applications that they use aren't supported for Linux, that's going to be a problem for the company, for those users. Either that, or you're going to have to find them an alternate application that does what they need it to do for the Linux operating system, and then plan in the training time for them to convert over to the new software. Okay? So there is an organizational needs document, PDF, that comes up, and here is that document. So it talks about how it's broken down, and it talks about that even what you see here, you are free to invent additional details. Make sure to document them in your Project One site survey template. For example, out of 40 desktops, 30 are running Windows, 10 are cloud-based, 3 are running Windows Server, and 7 are running Red Hat Linux. Okay? So those are the kind of things that you can make up. If they're not specified in this document, you can choose to make those assumptions, put them in the document, and those become part of the document. So all these things are otherwise spelled out in here, and that's where you take your information from. Now, the template is a Word document template. Let me blow this up a little bit. And then this is where you fill out the information listing your stakeholders and your information and number of users that are on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and the servers and hardware types, the network connections, how many are wireless, how many are wired, what applications are being used, which OSs support them, and then your proposal down at the bottom. All of that is what goes into your site survey, and that's what you turn in that template. And that is what is week 2. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, or if it's of a general nature, you can put it in the discussion board, the general questions discussion board, and I can answer it for everybody. If it's of a personal nature, you can always email me at k.herbst at snhu.edu, excuse me, and I will be happy to answer it. Otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I'll see you on the discussion boards. Thank you.